I am delighted to introduce the first of the Escalator writers. Debbie found her voice after moving to Norwich in 2013. She has now had a short story published in a collection by the University of East Anglia and performed at the Norwich Arts Centre. In her debut novel, The Eel Trap, she draws on the lived experience of marriage, business, motherhood and divorce to depict the struggles and mental fragility of a woman in crisis. Her passions are chalk streams, horses, and the North Norfolk coast. Debbie has been mentored by Yvvette Edwards. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. In this reading from the Eel Trap, Jen, who's in the throes of a bitter divorce, returns to the past where she hopes to find some answers. I'm in the forest again. I feel the roots of the giant trees grow over my feet and the branches close over its dark heart. On wild nights, you could harvest eels in the storm, raise up spirits under the moonlight, dance on the banks of the river, captivated by your own reflection. Liewood, accessible only by an interminable, winding, narrow track. Signs warning against trespass, jabbed into the ground or nailed onto the trees above as you wound your way deep within. But once through the trees, you'd enter the glade where the summer sun shone on our backs, on the old mill house and the land around it, on the swathes of forest that hid us from view. We never distinguished between the glorious parts of it. It was Liewood to us, all of it, our own enchanted island between the spreading arms of the river. The house was covered by a blood-red creeper. You could barely see the front door, let alone the Georgian sashes. As I walked towards it unprepared, Will took my hand, and the mayflies swarmed all around us like a welcoming party. Tiny creatures with creamy green bodies and long lace wings. Much later, Rick told me that unable to eat, they're doomed to die. I became aware then of the ephemeral nature of their lives, a dance of love that ends in death. It doesn't take much to imagine I'm back in the kitchen. I can see the breadcrumbs on the floor. I can see the wooden chopping board which bore the scars of the large serrated knife Mary kept beside it, where she cut slabs off the loaf she'd have pulled from the Aga. I can see Rick sitting at the table, slathering on the butter and thick homemade gooseberry jam, wiping the juice off his chin with the back of his hand. I can see the chipped Belfast sink which Mary used to scrub vigorously, the unpredictable old brass tap which would eventually splutter into life, driving her mad. Cats, dogs, even the odd rescued duckling. The whole wonderful disorder of her busy kitchen. The fruit and vegetables pulled up from the garden. Beetroot, carrots, clods of peaty soil stuck to their skins. Incredible smells. Soups bubbling away on the range. The chaos of books and papers jostling for position with pots and pans. The tailor's tortoiseshell bringing in a mouse. The tiny creature's head hanging by a thread. The children terrified yet laughing. Mary chasing the spitting cat down the stairs with a broom as it bolts out through the gap, leaving its spoils behind, bloody innards spilling over the carpet. When he first took me there, Will didn't bother to knock. He just pushed open the door and bounded up the stairs, dragging me behind him up to the flat. And there was Mary, pulling apart a bunch of radishes, scratching off the dirt, gently scraping away the flesh near the stems, tossing them into a bowl one by one. Her red hair was piled up into a top knot, little skeins escaping down the back of her neck, where the top of her apron touched her skin. The radio was on. She was humming along to the sound of Fleetwood Mac, occasionally dipping the end of a radish into the dish of salt on the windowsill and popping it into her mouth. "Marry," Will said. She turned round and I caught the full force of those emerald eyes. "This is Jenny." He pushed me forward and she gave me a hug. "Hello, darling," she said. "I've been waiting to meet you." My lips brushed her cheek. She tasted of salt and smelt of soil and lily of the valley. Will leant across her and grabbed one of the radishes from the rough bundle. He crunched it between his teeth. "Rick's not here," she said, flicking him on the shoulder with a tea towel. "He's clearing some weed down on the bottom beat." She must have seen the shadow pass across Will's face. She wiped her hands on her apron. "The fish are biting today," she said, looking out of the window over to the pool. "Why don't you go and catch a couple?" I followed him downstairs to Rick's office on the ground floor, where it looked like 2 rooms had been knocked into one. Traces of the destruction were still visible through several layers of peeling paintwork. The stub of a thick cigar had been squashed into a cut glass ashtray. Its acrid smell caught the back of my throat. Rick had been tying flies on the dining table, paraphernalia spread all around. His hat was upturned beside the catgut and feathers, its greasy rim heavy with dried sweat. A shaft of sunlight fell on the pages of a large ledger, lying open on a mahogany bureau. All the furniture was dark, heavy, oppressive. The chairs pushed up against the table, cabinets in every alcove. Some had been locked with the keys still in position. Others had doors that hung slightly ajar. I caught sight of the barrel of a gun in the one nearest the fireplace, the pewter glinting through the dust. I wandered over and peered at the yellow folio pages of the register, divided up roughly into columns. There were dates, names, and the weights of various fish, the bait used to catch them. The handwriting was bold but neat, old-fashioned. There was a column for remarks. River running high, 8th of March. Abundant mayfly a bit lower down. Names of grand-sounding visitors. Lord and Lady Runworth. Dr. G.E. Sedgwick. Several paintings of birds and landscapes hung on the walls, as well as stuffed fish in display cases. I touched the glass of one housing a big brown trout, its skin like leather. Behind another pane, there was a small fish I couldn't identify, deformed, swollen up like a frog. Killed at Felbridge by CF on 30th of May, 1936, inscribed on the plaque underneath, along with measurements of its length, girth, and the dimensions of its head. The fire had been laid up in the grate, despite it being early summer, and just above it, balanced on the mantelpiece, there was an old map of the river, from the lock hatches at Lokeford to the Land's End near the sea. You could pick out the churches, the breakwaters, the common plantations and the heath at Shepherd's Corner. It was just a section of the lie, about 15 miles in all. "We're connected," I said, tracing the plan of the river from my home at Embridge to Lywood through the dull glass. "Of course we are, Jen," Will said, but he had his back to me. I read the inscription out loud. "Engraved for Lord Melbury, 1826. I laughed. "We have been for over a century," I said, but he didn't answer. I picked up a pamphlet from the table about fishing knots and sat down on the long twill-covered sofa underneath the sash window. A wax jacket had been thrown over one of the arms. A leather leash spilled out from a pocket, its thick steel choke on the rug. I turned my head towards the window as a couple of swans landed in the pool, slapping the water with their feet. The faded, heavy curtains had been drawn back. The tapestry had been bleached by the sunlight flooding in through the panes, shining a light on the dust that had accumulated in the folds of the swags puddling over the floor. I imagined moonlight filling the room, illuminating the treasures inside, and the river glinting bright through the window. From where I was sitting, the water seemed to come right up to the door. I felt we could be swept out to sea at any moment. Will was rummaging about in the far corner, where a collection of rods had been propped up against the wall. "Come on, Jen." He'd picked out one with a cork handle and was connecting the reel. gently fingering the eyelets. He handled it tenderly. "Let's catch you your first fish." He nodded towards a battered metal tin on the table. "Grab that." It was cool to the touch. I had a sudden urge to press it against my cheek to allay the clawing atmosphere of the room. "Jen," he said from the doorway, half smiling, "stop daydreaming." He gestured to me as he made his way out to the hallway. I followed him. That was the pattern. I followed. Through ferns, forests, mists, and jagged shadows. Upstream against the current, barefoot and unprepared. Along cliff edges and down narrow passageways. I have learned that it is possible to be both afraid and beguiled. Afraid of the lightning bolt wreaked by the storm, yet embracing that charge. Electrification. I was 17. He was the centre of my universe. Thank you all.